The less you know, the better you sleep. That's the title of journalist David Satter's terrifying book on the realities of modern Russia. Well, get ready for some sleepless nights because former CIA officer John Sipher is about to make sure you know plenty. A 28-year veteran and a close friend of Satter, Sipher has seen the Kremlin's secrets up close. And now he sat down with Jason J. Smart from the Kyiv Post to reveal just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Fair warning, things are about to get dark. Let's start by properly introducing Sipher because in Russia, knowing too much can be a death sentence. Few people have uncovered the Kremlin's darkest secrets and made it out in one piece. He's one of them. As mentioned, Sipher spent 28 years in the CIA. He worked at the agency's National Clandestine Service, or NCS for short, the CIA's shadowy high-stakes division that handles the world's most dangerous covert missions. The NCS is the heartbeat of US intelligence, running everything from counter-terrorism operations to tracking nuclear threats, all while operating in the deadliest hotspots across the globe. And Sipher wasn't just an observer, he was at the center of it all. As chief and deputy chief of station in Europe and Asia, Sipher ran operations in some of the most perilous environments you can imagine. He recruited spies inside Russia during some of its darkest hours. And this wasn't just your typical office job, this was espionage at the highest level. The man has been knee-deep in the world of human intelligence. So when he talks about Russia, he knows what he's talking about. He's lived it. And it's not like he retired into a quiet life, far from it. After walking away from the CIA with a Distinguished Career Intelligence Medal, Sipher is still making waves. He's out there warning Washington about the dangerous shift in US intelligence, advising top policy groups, and even making sure Hollywood gets its espionage right. And now he's sitting down to share his jaw-dropping insights about Russia, insights you won't find anywhere else. Since we've been talking about secrets, spies, and intelligence agencies, you know these insights concern Russia's own powerful and shadowy network. And according to Sipher, this network is much more powerful than it should be, or that most people realize. So let's dig into what makes Russia's intelligence apparatus so dangerous, and why it's more active than ever. Russia's intelligence services are unique, for more reasons than one, but the biggest reason? Their sheer global presence. Unlike most countries, Russia has maintained a worldwide intelligence network that spans continents and crosses borders from Asia to Europe and beyond. As Sipher explains, this is something few countries can claim. Russia and the Soviet Union before them have had a worldwide intelligence service, so it was one of the few places, one of the few services that has that kind of reach, he says. And this is no exaggeration. Russia's espionage capabilities are truly massive, and they're only growing, as you'll hear in this video. However, what makes Russia's intelligence services even more remarkable is their ability to maintain that global network, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Not only that, but Russia has maintained some of the key players from the Soviet era as well. In Sipher's words, one thing that was able to stay over from the Soviet days after the fall of the Soviet Union was the security service as an intelligence service. They knew where the bodies were buried. Even as much of the government crumbled, these seasoned operatives continued to wield immense power, securing a significant role as Russia rebuilt itself in the 1990s. But here's the oddest part, according to Sipher. All these shadowy operations, all the covert networks, exist despite the fact that Russia's intelligence agencies aren't exactly flush with resources. After all, they're operating in a country with a relatively small economy compared to its size. Sipher compares Russia's economy to Italy. Unlike other countries with a small economy like what Russia has, the size of Italy or something, it nonetheless has a worldwide network of intelligence professionals, much larger than a country of their size or relative power should have, Sipher explains. And he's absolutely right. With the GDP of $2.18 trillion in 2024, Russia isn't exactly flexing on the global economic stage, especially when you compare it to much smaller countries like Italy, which has a higher GDP of $2.37 trillion. On paper, Italy's economy is in a stronger position, yet the country's global reach barely makes a dent. And here Russia is, with an intelligence network that outstrips its economic stature by a wide margin. So how is this possible? Well, Russia's influence on the world stage is a testament to the strategic importance the country places on intelligence, using it to punch well above its weight. You see, other nations view their intelligence services as a supplementary tool, a means of gathering crucial information to help inform leadership decisions. But not for Russia. For Russia, intelligence isn't just an accessory to foreign policy, it's a key weapon, as Sipher puts it. This difference in perspective is massive. Russia sees intelligence services as the very core of its power. These agencies are the eyes and ears of the Kremlin, extending its influence and acting as its covert arm in shaping global events. So it's no wonder Russia treats these services as a strategic priority, despite a relatively modest economy. After all, remember who's been at the helm of Russia for decades now? Vladimir Putin, a former KGB agent. Putin's ties to Russia's intelligence services run deeper than his time as president. They're integral to who he is, shaping his worldview and his power. As Sipher points out, Putin's even proud to call himself a Chekist, a term used for officers of the Cheka, the Soviet Union's first secret police agency, which was later transformed into the KGB, the Committee for State Security. The Cheka was known for carrying out mass arrests, executions, and brutal suppression of dissent, so being proud of it is a pretty telling indicator of how Putin views his role and his methods. And Putin isn't exactly hiding his reverence for intelligence. In his autobiographical book, First Person, Putin said that one man's effort could achieve what whole armies could not. That's what amazed him most about intelligence. One spy could decide the fate of thousands of people. Now imagine what a whole network of these spies can do, especially when it's more active than ever. But how do we know this? Well, Sipher confirms it. When asked by Smart about the growing activity of Russian intelligence, Sipher didn't hesitate. "That's definitely accurate," he said. He went on to explain that Russian intelligence operations have become increasingly aggressive in recent years, and this is directly tied to Putin's view of the West as a primary enemy. Putin's government has engaged in a wide array of covert operations, assassinations, disinformation, subversion, and deception, all aimed at destabilizing adversaries and pushing Russia's interests globally. However, Sipher pointed out that this isn't a new phenomenon. In fact, Russia has been using these tactics for over a century. What's different now is the sheer intensity and scope of these operations. From cyber attacks to physical assassinations and everything in between, Russia's intelligence services are more brazen and relentless than at any time in recent history. However, amid all these tools at Russia's disposal, there's one their intelligence services keep returning to time and time again: disinformation, or as Sipher calls it, fake stories. A weapon that has been honed and perfected over the years. Sipher explains just how effective this tactic can be, particularly when it comes to influencing powerful nations like the United States. As he puts it, the Russians often try to create false stories and press false narratives to their enemies to try and keep their enemies weak and off balance. This chaos, he explains, puts the opposition in a weaker position, making it easier for Russia to pursue its objectives. Take, for example, the infamous disinformation campaign during the Cold War, which included the KGB planting the fake story that the US Defense Department had created the AIDS virus. It's an incredible example of how the Soviet Union used its resources to manipulate public opinion and divide communities. By planting such stories in obscure foreign journals, they could quietly spread them through Soviet-controlled media channels. In this case, the lie took root, gaining traction in conspiracy circles, and has since remained part of the darker corners of the internet. And this wasn't a one-off occurrence. It was a concerted strategy employed by Russian intelligence over decades, one that cost as much as $3 billion annually in the 1980s. And this strategy included everything, from the Kennedy assassination conspiracy to even influencing elections. Speaking of influencing elections, we must touch on the 2016 US presidential election, as did Sipher and Smart. Russia's interference in 2016 was massive, complex, and aimed squarely at destabilizing American democracy. Under Putin's orders, Russia launched an operation known as Project Lacta to hurt Hillary Clinton and boost Donald Trump. To that end, Russia's military intelligence service, the GRU, hacked into the Democratic National Committee and Clinton campaign emails, releasing them through outlets like WikiLeaks, and this was just the tip of the iceberg. The Russian Internet Research Agency's budget spiked by 70% between 2016 and 18, and 21 US states were targeted by Russian hackers. In other words, the impact of Project Lacta and its success was felt not just during the election, but in the years that followed. However, Sipher was more interested in how Russia pulled this operation off. Russian operatives created fake social media accounts, organized protests, and pushed radical views, all in an effort to divide the nation. They manipulated social media to stir up anger on both the right and left, reaching over 126 million Facebook users alone. And that's where the main difference between the US and Russia lies. Speaking about the US, Sipher explains, "We try to collect information to help policymakers make better decisions by having more information on what's happening abroad. This is the essence of Western intelligence, gathering critical data, analyzing it, and using it to inform decisions. Whether through diplomats, satellites, or spies, the goal is always about intelligence collection to shape foreign policy with the right information." But the broader remit of Russian intelligence isn't just about finding spies, it's about manipulating the information landscape. They're looking for people to push their misinformation, says Sipher, and the Russian strategy during the 2016 election is a prime example of this. Russian operatives didn't just focus on stealing sensitive information, they worked to build an entire ecosystem of disinformation. Sometimes they amplify existing bad actors, other times they create their own narratives from scratch, but either way, they're achieving the ultimate goal, manipulating the flow of the information. And for this, Russia doesn't need spies. It needs the so-called informal contacts that influence the narrative. According to Sipher, Russia could even go as far as to pump information into channels like Fox News to influence key figures in the US government, like President Trump. So essentially, Russia casts a much wider net than the US. Sipher gives another example, the Iranian nuclear program. This program has long been a point of contention in global politics. Iran, which has maintained a civilian nuclear energy program for over 50 years, insists its efforts are for peaceful purposes. However, over the years there have been multiple revelations that Iran has secretly pursued nuclear weapons research, which has raised alarms in the US and other Western nations. For example, in 2023, Iran's uranium stockpile was estimated to be 22 times the amount agreed upon in the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Sipher explains how both the US and Russia would approach this program. For the US, he puts himself in the main role. If I'm going overseas and I'm trying to find out what the Iranian nuclear program is about, we're going to try to look, okay, who are the people that might have access to that information? So the US approach would focus on traditional intelligence methods, gathering information through spies, satellite reconnaissance, and diplomatic channels to understand Iran's nuclear capabilities and intentions. Sipher emphasizes that the US would also focus on finding people who might be willing to spy for the country, people who have direct access to the inner workings of the Iranian nuclear program. Russia, however, would also try to use proxies or amplify certain narratives to influence US policymakers or public opinion about the Iranian nuclear threat. It's all about serving its geopolitical interests, not the greater good. Now, Russia might not rely on spies as heavily as the US, but more and more Russians seem to be eagerly signing up for the role, and this is where some of Sipher's most shocking insights come into play. Now, Hollywood loves to paint spies as the suave and shadowy figures, but their motivations, as we've often been told, tend to be self-serving. Even Sipher confirms this by saying, some people work for money, but there's more to it than that, as Sipher points out. There are as many motivations as there are people. One of the biggest driving forces, according to Sipher, is ego. Many spies feel overlooked or ignored by their own government or society. They don't believe that they're being listened to by their own people, Sipher explains. For these individuals, the idea that the US government would actually care about their views is deeply appealing. The chance to be heard, to have their insights valued, motivates them to take the risky step of becoming a spy. But even this isn't the most common reason Russian people become US spies. The true driving force for many Russians choosing to work with the West is their disillusionment with their own government, their realization that they're living in a system that's corrupt, repressive, and ultimately destroying their country's future. As Sipher reflects, those who turn to espionage are often the best and brightest in Russian society, driven not by personal ambition, but by the desperate desire to save their country from the chokehold of a corrupt regime. At some point, something breaks inside them, Sipher reveals. They realize that no matter how capable or well-meaning they are, they will never change the system from within. This leads them to a drastic decision to help the CIA to offer insight into a government they see as fundamentally broken. That's why Sipher doesn't consider what they're doing as a betrayal. In fact, he explains that many Russians working for the US believe that their government is betraying their country. In this context, the act of spying for the US isn't a transaction, it's seen as a rescue mission. Russia has been for decades a repressive, imperialist country, Sipher explains. Under Putin's leadership, the nation has grown more and more corrupt, and dissent is harshly punished. And it's gotten a lot worse since Russia invaded Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has ruined their economy for decades to come, Sipher states bluntly. The war, launched under a miscalculation of strength, has led to hundreds of thousands of Russian casualties, with no significant territorial gains to show for it. He's literally sent hundreds of thousands of Russian boys off to die in Ukraine. Sipher continues, highlighting the devastating toll this war has taken. For many Russians, this isn't just a failure of strategy, it's a complete failure of leadership. That's why Sipher believes the number of Russians turning to espionage is only likely to increase, and it already has. However, this probably won't affect Putin's view of the war whatsoever. According to Sipher, Putin believes he's winning the war in Ukraine, even though the numbers paint a very different picture. However, this is his only option. As Sipher explains, as a dictator, you have to spin a narrative that you're winning because you can't afford the other narrative. Essentially, Putin's grip on power relies on projecting strength for the world's eyes and his own people. But the reality on the ground tells a completely different story. As Sipher explains, Russia oftentimes lost more people in a single day for the last several years than we lost in Afghanistan in 20 years. And he's right. The US lost around 2,200 servicemen in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021, while Russia suffered similar losses in December 2024 on a daily basis. Just let that sink in. Over 95,000 Russian soldiers have died since the start of the war, and the casualties don't stop there. The number of Russian deaths could actually be much higher, with estimates ranging from 146,000 to 211,000, considering the bodies that remain unrecovered on the battlefield. He's losing, and where he's gained essentially no more land than he had before, Sipher continues, pointing to the stagnant territorial gains. Upon initially launching the invasion, Russia occupied roughly 46,000 square miles. Add the 16,000 square miles from before, and you get about 27% of Ukraine. But 3 years later, this number didn't increase. In fact, it dropped to about 20%. But even with these grim numbers, Putin still needs to maintain the illusion of victory. Why? Because admitting otherwise could spell disaster for his regime. He said so himself in first person. You have to take a pragmatic attitude, and you have to keep thinking of victory. However, with the loss of so many lives and so little gained in return, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a costly folly, one that could eventually come back to haunt Putin, no matter how he tries to spin it, though it wouldn't be the first thing to haunt Putin, that's for sure. This brings us to the 1999 apartment bombings in Russia. More than 300 people lost their lives, and another 1,000 were injured in a series of explosions across the country. These bombings rocked the Russian public and dramatically reshaped the country's political landscape. Officially, the Russian government blamed Chechen militants, but the Chechens themselves denied involvement, even calling the attacks an attempt to frame them. This discrepancy only fueled the growing suspicions that there was more to the story than met the eye. And according to David Sipher, the journalist we mentioned at the beginning of the video, there was. Like many others, including Sipher, Sipher believes that the bombings could have been a calculated false flag operation. The theory is that the Russian government, under Putin's watch as Prime Minister of Russia, orchestrated the bombings to ignite a war in Chechnya and boost Putin's political fortunes. This tragic event set the stage for Putin's rise to power, a path forged in blood and fear. If this sounds unbelievable, you're not the only one. Sipher explains that it's hard for a normal person to think that that's possible, that you would do that to your own people. But as things stand, it's the cold reality that brought Putin to power and set the stage for the chaos we see today. For the Mafia state that Russia has now become, as Smart describes it. And Sipher agrees, Russia truly is a mafia state today. One where corruption, crime, and power all blend together into one dangerous cocktail. As he puts it, Putin's got a gangster mentality. A former intelligence officer who runs the country like a mob boss. Forget about the usual labels like dictator or authoritarian. In many ways, Putin is the Don of Russia, a leader who doesn't just rule the country but treats it like his personal empire, as if he's the CEO of Russia Inc. And it's not just Putin at the top. His entire regime is a tangled mess of crime and state power. From cybercriminals operating under his watch to shady dealings with international criminal groups, Russia's leadership has blurred the lines between government and organized crime. Putin has made deals with criminals worldwide, using them for everything from destabilizing governments to funding his personal agendas. He's got the money, the muscle, and the connections to make it all work, ruling by fear rather than loyalty. That's why it shouldn't be surprising that Sipher, a man who's studied Putin for years, can't hide his disgust. He describes Putin as a cold, calculating, nasty person. And this isn't just some political opinion, it's an honest assessment from someone who's seen the worst of what Putin has done. However, the world will have to keep playing his games until he's dead or overthrown, as Sipher puts it. After which, we might find out just how many more skeletons are buried in his closet. For now, share your thoughts about the secrets and insights Sipher revealed. Which one shocked you the most? We're looking forward to hearing from you in the comments section below.